Hey guys, welcome everyone to the second part of our webinar series called Digital Interrupted AI Reality Check. My name is Kane Balagte and I'm the founder of Good Front End. We're a tech partner specializing in e-commerce storefronts, particularly in the headless commerce and composable commerce space. Some of our latest projects include working with brands like Eurocar Parts, Clark Shoes, and Sofology. Before we dive in, let me quickly cover some housekeeping items. We have a Q&A box available where you can ask questions throughout the session. Please feel free to drop your questions there. We'll be monitoring it, promise, and we'll make sure to address them. We also really appreciate you leaving your feedback after the webinar. This helps us improve our future sessions and better serve you and the community. Just a heads up, we are recording today's sessions, so you'll be able to share it with other interested parties once it is available. If you'd like us to notify you when the recording is ready, please let us know via the feedback box after the webinar, and we will send you an email as soon as that is available. Without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to JP, who will be discussing invisible UX. JP?
Hi, I'm JP, and today I'd like to talk about invisible UX, specifically on how it is the silent disruption of AI and how it affects the world of tech, e-commerce specifically. So let's first define what invisible UX actually is. So invisible UX is basically making users go through some of the manual steps that we typically do when visiting or using an app or website. So we skip steps like searching, browsing, filtering, pairing. Um, Reason why we short circuit this is to make things faster for the user by predicting their needs and acting on behalf of them. So this is not necessarily an improvement on UX, but more of removing it actually. So first I'll dive deep on how AI personalization is disrupting web development and how things went from fast to relevant, at least from a performance perspective. So remember when speed was everything, which is not so long ago. For the past decade, how we measure and track performance are always based on metrics. So lighthouse scores are very meaningful. CDN caching, JS bundling, we do these things to maximize performance as we can so that we can provide better for the user. So speed used to be about getting the same fast experience for everyone. But with AI, every user sees something different. Um, that's because nowadays, what we do on modern websites is that we have more dynamic content. But AI personalization breaks the traditional approaches. So, a good example of traditional performance, at least here in this example, the Apple homepage. So everyone sees the same hero banner. So we see the iPhone banner, the Apple Watch banner. So these things are fully static, they are cached, and there's minimal to zero personalization. So now moving to the AI personalized approach. So more dynamic content, that means no two users see the same thing. The downside, it's a bit harder to cache since you're not provided, or at least you're not showing the same thing to two users or multiple users. Uh, but real time AI delivery expected from these pages. So Shopee and Lazada are some of the most common examples, at least from the Asian market. So personalized product listing pages and banners and pop-ups are more geared towards user preferences and their recent searches, recent purchases, their yeah, their shopping history. So now I'll try to go a bit more specific on how things went from faster all the way to invisible UX and how we redefined the word fast. So, in traditional sense, checkout can be a good example. And how we did things was we enter things manually. So, add to cart, we manually input the product selections, billing details, shipping details. So, how we optimize speed at the time, how we did things fast was making sure that these checkout pages are loaded faster. The experience is much more smoother for the user. So it's more optimized for clarity and control. So now, a few years later, we go into UX optimized. So this is where the shift to faster or invisible UX starts. So things are streamlined. It's still user driven, but we save the shipping and billing details so that all we have to worry about is the checkout itself. So a good example is the Amazon's one-click buy now. So there's minimal to no forms at all. It skips most of the manual steps, and then just one click of a button, you have already purchased the item. And now we have AI powered, which is where invisible UX is thriving. So we don't have to, as users, we don't have to do the searching most of the time. We rely on AI to suggest products for us. Automated reordering is a thing that's more prevalent in invisible UX. Um, Refilled carts and bundles are also a thing. And then a major feature in most recent e-commerce apps are shopping assistants. So this was more discussed on a previous episode where we talk about these AI assistants, specifically in this example, Klarna. So I've narrowed down some of the types of invisible UX in e-commerce. So the first type is pre-filled predictive checkouts. So these types of invisible UX are more on predicting what the user needs. So Amazon Buy Now, where your shipping and billing details are already stored, as I mentioned before. Um, then another example is Uber, where suggested destinations, pickup points, and even payment method. So the next example is instant product access. So these are more common in social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where you can buy directly from the video itself on how where influencers may sometimes live stream without leaving the feed, and then Instagram checkout where products are embedded in your feed. So the third type is reorder and buy again nudges. So Instacart is another example where your grocery list can be pre-filled, and then Amazon's buy it again section where consumables and products are shown before you even search for one. And then the last type is zero state personalization. So Shopee and Lazada, a previous example I've shown, is a very common example where content changes based on preferences. And Netflix, where it shows you created content. YouTube can be also a good example of this. So I'll describe more on the landscape of e-commerce and how things are transformed. I've listed down at least 5 areas of where invisible UX can has already transformed um, how things are working. So first, landing pages. Um, in a previous example, as I said from the Apple website, instead of seeing the same content for every user, now things are more personalized per visitor. Chat assistants, we went from rigid scripts to Klarna AI, Instacart AI. Now, videos and e-commerce websites, before the most common way was to embed product videos on pages. But now we have TikTok Shop and Amazon Live where products are advertised via live streams from influencers. Uh, Check out. So, as I mentioned before, again, um, we went from manual form inputs and selections to relying on AI to search products for us and then process some reorderings for us. And then the last one, engine optimization. So we went from SEO to AEO, which is discussed on a previous episode where we go dive deep more on answer engine optimization. So basically, invisible UX has always been around us. It's not necessarily a new thing because of AI. So invisible authentication is the most recent or like the most common example since a lot of us are using smartphones and we can do payments via Face IDs. Like Apple Pay is a good example, and Google Smart Lock. Another example are contextual nudges. So Google Maps can suggest the leave time for your travels so that they can predict the exact time when you can arrive. Um, Amazon Dash also has this feature where you can reorder appliance needs. In this example, um, like laundry, where you can just press a single button and then you have laundry detergents are already ordered. So Amazon Go also has this walkout shopping where you skip the the process of um, having the product scanned through the cashier. Just tap your products and tap payments. Same for Apple Pay, where you can use your phone to just pay directly to gates on train stations and stuff. Invisible loading is another common example on how it's always been around us. So Netflix and YouTube, we're all familiar with how um, they prefetch the next video to watch, and then Gmail, where instead of going through emails one by one, um, we can display the whole thread in a single page. So, with all those examples that I've mentioned, um, what we can conclude is that invisible UX is basically lesser steps plus combination of relevant content. So, I mentioned the downside of invisible UX and AI personalization is caching. So, it turns every user into a cache miss. But the upside is that we can provide the user with the correct or um, preferred content, basically, where performance edge is not about speed in terms of metrics and how fast the loading times are. It's more of a speed of relevance. But of course, like all good things, invisible UX is not perfect. So sometimes invisible UX can get a bit out of hand, not necessarily from a technological standpoint, but from a user or consumer standpoint. So sometimes invisible UX or like in personalization, you can be suggested some products that are not your preferences. So it can be helpful, but sometimes it can be creepy. So like an ad for something that you just bought or baby products when you're not even a parent. So over personalization echo chambers is like the main concern when it comes to personalization and invisible UX. So for you pages or FYPs as they are called in Instagram and TikTok, they basically shape your algorithm. The algorithm shapes your feed based on what you watch, but sometimes it can get a bit out of control because, for example, you may watch one piece of content and then the next thing you know, your whole feed is made up of that specific content. So in this example that I provided, you like one sweater or like maybe one sweater video, and then the next thing you know, your whole for you page is pretty much sweaters. So users may feel trapped by repetitive suggestions. Um, there's a report from early 2024 where Amazon's AI driven recommendation models were surfacing some strange recommendations from their frequently bought together sections. So there was a combination where cat food, power battery, and lawn chairs were suggested in this section, which is kind of weird since these products are different categories and you don't typically see this type of bundle at all. So, um, over reliance on behavioral data without logic checks, at least, can result to UX regressions since it results to bad personalization. Another example of why it's not perfect are unwanted auto suggestions. So, YouTube, most common example on how the algorithm provides us with content sometimes can get a bit weird as well, where YouTube can recommend content aggressively, even though, let's say, you watch one specific um, content or one specific video, and then results to, having feed that's not up to your preferences. Mistime automation is one more concern on why it's not perfect. So Amazon has smart reordering features. So a potential problem is that when um, you get suggested or you are reordered some of these ink from their let's say for your printer, even though you just did order like just recently and you don't need ink right now, it breaks the magic of we know your needs. And basically it just, I mean, AI doesn't really know um what you want specifically. Like it doesn't really predict. It relies on behavioral data, as I stated before. So that's sometimes it can be a bit of a burden if you don't necessarily purchase all the time, or you're not purchasing stuff um, frequently. Yeah, it can be a bit annoying sometimes. Another example, unwanted smart checkouts. So this isn't necessarily a groundbreaking problem for invisible UX, or at least for personalization. But if you're the type of user who, let's say, has multiple billing options, shipping options, and usually change from one purchase to another, then smart checkouts might not be for you because the sacrifice, or let's say the downside of smart checkouts, is that there's loss of perceived control. So there's not enough clarity since you're relying on saved data. So this isn't necessarily something that Invisible UX can solve if you're the type of user that wants to check things manually and input things manually. And going back to some of the unwanted auto suggestions, there was a report on early 2024 where Spotify users complained that the autoplay feature, or the just for you um, section, um, some of these playlists kept repeating old songs for months. So a potential problem of this type of problem is um, AI models could possibly be trained on long history rather than choosing a specific time window. So that results in invisible UX being repetitive, or there's reduced perceived quality. So this is a good example of how logic checks are necessary when it comes to implementing features that involve the use of AI personalization and visible UX. Since we want users to be suggested, at least in Spotify's case, songs that are up to speed of the user in terms of trends. So maybe we want to um, train these models on specific time frames, like let's say a week ago, maybe recent, or a month ago. So rather than just basing on the whole um, behavioral data of each user. So how these examples specifically affect web performance. So surfacing irrelevant bundles, as I mentioned before, they can be a waste of UI and API calls, irrelevant impressions, wasted bandwidth, then inconsistent perceived UX, just like in the Spotify example or the Amazon Dash example. It can break the faster trust experience. So users might be more um, comfortable with manual steps or like manual searching, manual placement of information, and then lastly, stale prefetching. So it can be perceived slowness and sometimes annoying to the user. So basically, invisible UX is a double-edged sword, at least from my own standpoint. So why is it a double-edged sword? So I've listed some of the benefits and challenges. So benefits are mostly catered towards users. So there's higher conversions, less friction, more purchases. Personal relevance, so feeds and suggestions are increasingly tuned to the user. So there's more engagements incoming. Um, Faster perceived UX. So even if the loading time of the web pages aren't fast, perceived speed improves. So perceived speed meaning the users get to what they want faster. The right content is provided faster. So challenges are mostly behind the scenes. So one is, as I mentioned before, it's harder to cache since static content is easier and cheaper. Personalization can be cached easily since we're dealing with dynamic content rather than static ones. Expensive infrastructure. So this is an obvious challenge, especially when there's more AI models involved and training, since it increases complexity from engineering side, and fewer templates can handle these types of problems. And then privacy and trust risks. So invisible UX relies on user data. So while that is good, at least from first glance, it can feel invasive, or as I mentioned before, it can be a bit creepy at times. So to summarize all that, personalization drives growth, but it can create some infrastrain, performance hits, and possibly ethical dilemmas. So that's basically the trade-off of having AI personalization and more invisible UX in websites and applications. But yeah, it's powerful that it can keep users engaged because it looks feels better. And there's less steps to deal with. So how exactly do clients and teams build towards some invisible UX and personalization? So here I've listed some of the common areas of e-commerce sites and platforms. So first is, as I mentioned, checkout. Um, we rely on pre-filled forms, skipping some of the redundant steps, and auto apply coupons is a good example. So we personalize these steps per visitor. And as for content, specifically talking about home pages, landing pages, so we predict and pre-select filters or categories, like for example in the PLPs, and then we approach this by basing on store user behavior and their history, plus some fuzzy matching. Performance. As for performance, we would most likely prefetch some of the paths and products that are the user can most likely visit. So how we approach this, at least from web development perspective, are using router prefetching from Next.js and quick links. Reordering. So for reordering, recommendation is simply adding smart buy again based on frequency, frequently bought together sections, recommendations after a user's purchase or even before a user searches for products. So how we approach this are time-based nudges plus storing a cart memory. And then lastly, for authentication, the use of silent sessions, magic links, and biometrics. As I stated before, the use of face IDs is the most common approach for this. So in web development, we can use Auth0, NextAuth, WebAuthn. We can implement these biometrics and silent sessions to enhance or lessen the steps in, let's say, logging in or making transactions. So that's all for my presentation. We can conclude that invisible UX is basically how it's the blueprint on how our e-commerce platforms are evolving in the world of where AI is basically emerging. So yeah, that's all for my talk. Thank you for listening.